Hello. I didn't notice you there. No, I'm just kidding. Today's a little different. I really couldn't resist playing with some breakbeats today. Last night I was driving to meet someone for dinner and was listening to Anz, who's one of my favorite DJs these days, based out of the UK. I think she's released some stuff on Hessel Audio with Ben UFO, and big fan of Ben UFO. I actually just saw him last weekend, and he's amazing. And so going to that show, feeling those first show, since quarantine, and feeling those vibrations really got me kind of inspired. And so just kind of been creating a lot and just trying to imitate a lot of the sounds I was feeling and feeling. So, a lot of the time when I'm in the car, I get really inspired listening to sets. The link is in the description, I think, but I will drop it in the chat as well. Here you go. But just playing with a few key items here. You'll notice there's no OP1 on the table today. And that's partially because I want to make some beats that are pretty much entirely localized on the Octatrack. Things I can play with just by turning on the Octatrack, having it plugged in, and not necessarily operating on samples. But we'll see, because I also have my bass station here. And I'm probably going to make some bass lines with it. Some like low breakbeatish. But today is very much a sort of open session, so if you have questions or anything, feel free to ask. I'm just kind of taking this time to experiment with some beats that I've been making, and I just want to make more, so I will be broadcasting that experience today. Yeah, like I was just making this pattern that I'm eventually going to lead to. Also playing with fills. That triplet kind of vibe is something that I really enjoyed in the set that I heard. And I'll show you how it works in a practical sense. Fill. So there's a few components here. I've got my clap on one section. Let's focus on the clap right now. These hi-hats that are in here are set to turn off during the fill. So the way a fill works is, hey Rustic. The way a fill works is you hold it down and you press page, and the next time it comes around, that way you can sort of get some variation, but you do have to kind of finagle some of the pattern. So basically these fills are set to, or these triggers are set to not play during the fill. And then I have this one, which is a retriggering snare that retriggers 6 times, that only shows up during the fill. So it's coming in now. So that's kind of a nice way to bring in the next pattern. Which is the kick. Oh, and then there's also this thing. And then I also have a tambourine in here. Just little ways to ramp up the tension. Only thing that I will mention about that is this one. You have to be careful. Oh wow, welcome from Myanmar. That's amazing. So one thing that you have to remember about the Octatrack is that these fills, if you have an Octatrack, is that these fills are per pattern. So if I tell this fill to play its fill version, which is basically triggering all the things that have fill set, then the other ones will do the same, except they'll only operate on their length. So like if this is a 2-bar fill, this is only a 1-bar fill, and it will actually start playing the original after that, which is really quite complicated and like creates possibility for a lot of like surprise and variation if you have different lengths of patterns that have their own fills. But so because I don't want to do that, I'm going to set this to a 2-bar fill, and these are all set so that they don't play during the fill. So you'll notice that when I set fill on, they turn off. This is actually slightly more complicated than you would think, because you basically have to set the length of it to hold for the amount of time. So I have it set so that it's holding for 8 steps. That way, when the next trigger doesn't play, it ends right at that point. So another aspect of this project is a trick that I learned beginning of quarantine last year, which is to use LFOs to trigger breakbeats. And this is one of my favorite things that I've learned on the Octatrack. So allow me to demonstrate. Essentially, I have an LFO that's playing this sample in slices, but you can't tell because it's playing them exactly the normal way. And it's also triggering the beginning sample here. So it's always going to sound the same at the beginning, but then these triggers are being, if you look at the slice pattern here, you should be able to tell. You'll notice it starts to jump around. if I move it slightly. And the reason that works is because I have the amount of slices set to things that would sound good. You kind of have to finagle it a little bit and play with which ones would sound okay. The main reason that this works every time is that there's two things. I want this trigger to always play the beginning of the sample. And the way that I do that, you can do it a couple ways, but the one that I kind of just did was have the depth be 0 and the start point be slice 1. That means that it'll always play the first slice of this breakbeat pattern at the very beginning. Then when you have these four, the crossfader is actually controlling the speed of the LFO that's controlling these different slice points that are being triggered. And at the neutral position, the speed happens to line up with the speed that the sample is. I feel like I sound like a crazy person. The speed has to line up with the length of the sample and how it's triggering across the pattern. So when I adjust the speed, suddenly I'm triggering other slices. So like at the neutral position, it's just playing the sample the way it would normally. And you can kind of tell because I could basically take the length of the release like it looks like it's passing through the sample at the speed that it normally would, but once I move this, you can see it starts to move a little further each time. If I do it again, and then all the way to the end, you'll notice the gaps in between are bigger. And so the combination of picking the right slice divisions, which in this case was 16. I thought it would be 32, but it's actually 16, because if you get in between the breaks, then you get these weird syncopated rhythms that don't sound as good. So if you want to try this out at home, you're going to have to use your judgment. And if it doesn't sound quite right and it's syncopated a lot, there's a chance it's because you've sliced it too finely and it's triggering in between these, and you want them to trigger on either like a kick or a snare or something more reliable. But this basically kind of lets you play with the breaks and create random fills that sound, reliably good. Once you find the sweet spot, they all sound pretty great. The only exception is if they accidentally trigger the last slice, because the last slice ends on like a silence, and that gets a little bit wonky. And one way that I've kind of worked around that personally is, if everyone's still following along, is to just make sure that the speed of the LFO is to test out basically what it sounds like when I push the crossfader all the way to the end, and make sure that it's not triggering the last slice, because I want this one at least to sound good. Like if I was to move this to 20 or something, 27, let's see. Yeah, see, that works too. There are some that won't work as well. That one actually sounds really good. I might just keep that. And essentially, once I set these up, I'm creating like moves for myself to make. So like if I'm performing this, I want to take out the kick. I want to take out the kick, trigger the fill, and move the crossfader. So the fill is going to give me that triplet thing that I inserted here, and it's also going to take out the claps, because the claps are assigned to be only playing during the fill, during the non-fill sections. So fill, take out kick, and move crossfader. You just have to remember to bring the kick back. You could even add like the synth. I mean, who knows if I would bring this. Let's try that one more time. So that's kind of the maybe not three, but the ingredients that are taking place here. You've got fills, LFOs, synths, and some crossfader action, sort of interplaying to create moments. And to me, I think the real trick is to figure out where I would put these things and keep them there so that as I'm performing, if I want to make an entire pattern here that's playing different sections that I want to play back at a club or something, I would really want to make sure that I have each of these locations ingrained. So like if the bass is going to be here, it needs to be here every time. If the breakbeat is going to be here, it needs to be here every time, and so on. And I think I could probably work something out for that. At the moment, I've been sort of using this same configuration since before last year this time. So I have my kicks here almost every time. I have 2 beat loops here. And then these two are kind of up for grabs. Sometimes I put a sample, like a flex machine here that I can loop. I can create something myself. Or I'll have some other loops in these 2 sections. At this moment, I'm trying to use a bass here that I could use, but I don't know. I think today I might play with using the bass station to record some loops. By the way, there's 2 ways you can trigger a fill. You can hit down in page, which will basically mean the next time it comes around, it plays the fill. Or, as it's playing, you can hold down up page, but that means your hands are occupied, so not as useful. And it only lasts as long as you hold it down. So, I mean, like, if you have some really crazy stuff in your fills, I think that could be really fun. I like to use the crossfader when I'm putting my hands on the machine, because it feels more performative to go like this. But, you could have LFOs attached to trigless trigs that are only applied during fills, and then suddenly you're playing how long you hold it down to create new sections, which can be pretty interesting. Yeah, so I'm just trying to build out like the next section that I want because it started so strong. So now I'm like wondering what should come next, and then I think I'm just gonna try to build it from there, as though like if you were a DJ and you were thinking like what kinds of things would come after this, I would think like a bass line, because as much as this beat works by itself, I think it would be helpful to have some kind of transition. Kind of cool. That's high praise. Kind of into that actually, because it just kind of darkens the shade of the beat a little bit, and especially if I take out the synth. So first I'm gonna copy the original vocal loop from pattern 1. Bring it over here. I'm gonna set an extra. I also just kind of want to audition it with the original synth line just to make sure it does kind of work together, so that when I do bring it back together, they all kind of play nice. Yeah, I like that. I like how understated it is, honestly. I'm going to record it without, let's put the bass in flex 2. Let's record it under A because the bass station's plugged into A. Let's give it 2-bar loop. Source, let's say 7 in case I do later want to record from my through machine, which is on 7. Quantize the recording to the 16, so that's on the bar. And so when I hit rec 1, I'll be recording my base station. Let's also set my buffer to record 2. Save. Is it set to hold? Yeah, it's set to hold. Okay, 1, 2. Save that. I actually kind of want to record 4 bars, so that I get 2 versions of it. So you'll notice it's playing it, once every, it's more than we want. So let's set the scale to the pattern to 1/4 so we can actually see 4 bars in a single sequence. Into it. So let's save that. Save sample copy. Save and assign sample to free flex. Flex 14. Let's move this over to flex 14. Just good, good habit to make. Yes, side eye. I think the Fader Fox really opens up the Octatrack in really fun ways. I'm glad that you've gotten it. You can make one setting and just stick with. I would recommend that. I haven't even moved from the setting that I started with. Pretty much the moment I got it. There's obviously a lot you can do. You can I could potentially import MIDI LFOs into another page, which would really expand the use of MIDI instruments as well. Just sort of creating new LFOs that the machine itself might not be able to have. You can also control MIDI with these knobs, so you can control velocity. That's something that I've thought would be pretty interesting, particularly track by track. So if you had 6 ARPs, you could control which ones were playing at what volumes on a single machine, like a multi-voice one. But yeah, Surgeon was the one who his overview on Resident Advisor, or I don't remember which one it was, but that was pretty inspiring to see how easy it was to play with the Octatrack that way. So yeah, this bass line, I'm going to put it into this track. And then we're going to bring that breakbeat here as well. I'm going to copy the reverb from the bass to the sample, just so I can have an exact copy, because I really liked how that sounded. That's you hold the effects page and hit copy and paste respectively to get that. Kind of playing with this tambourine sample. I'm gonna play it every 2. also kind of curious about what could potentially manipulate this bass line. I didn't give it very much high end, but something that I've really noticed about some of the tracks that I'm really enjoying these days is this sort of like wobbly bass that's also very subtle and just sounds super cool. So let's try that out. We're going to take a filter, apply it to the width, make it fairly quick, and I don't know if there's any, I mean, the actual way it's set up is not super important, like the type of triggering. I'm just going to have it sync to the trig, I think, to the bar. And then we're just going to play with it a little bit here. Probably fairly fast, I would imagine. Right, so you're starting to hear it. That's not bad. Wow, I love what's happening with these breaks. Again, like once you find the sweet spot, suddenly it just becomes a really fun way to perform. You don't even really have to know what you're doing because anything kind of sounds good. But it does take some figuring out where to slice it so that it does, every hit is like a win. And like, you'll notice I didn't save the kick to the crossfader because I tried doing that months ago where I was like, okay, you know, LFO goes to the right, speeds up the slices that are being triggered. Naturally, that's a break, so why not just attach the mute to the kick as well so that you naturally have a situation where you're, you know, where you have both of those steps in one move. The only issue with that is if I'm playing with it, if I want to try a setting right here, then suddenly I have the kick back in the beat. And I feel like it's things like this with the Octatrack where you create so many shortcuts that suddenly you've removed some of the fun of experimenting and knowing what's going on. It's almost like now there's only A or B, right? So like I can like this is the only place where it can be to create the proper effect. Whereas if I have the kick controlled down here, or if I'm muting it like this, which is, you know, a little more challenging. Then I'm doing more. I'm also more aware of like, you know, my involvement in the track. So I'm not as much like the crossfader to me is most powerful when I know that it's doing one thing and I can play with that thing. It's not just A or B, but I'm actually doing things in between. So having it sort of fulfill that one function, I think helps me feel more involved in the way that the music sounds. It requires some practice, of course, but I'm also much more connected to it. And I'm mixing live, which feels more exciting, I think. There's certain pitfalls. Like I might bring the kick back too loud because I'm too excited, and I'll just like turn the knob too far, which you can kind of eliminate by doing it more of a mute thing. And then on top of that, I'm also talking about using fills. Which is, a whole other ball game of like, oh shit, now I have to think about this other thing. So it's really just, I think, up to each person to figure out what their bandwidth is, what they can handle. And I think my main goal, now that I'm excited about this stuff again, like these things come in waves. I was just making like drone and ambient music, but my goal when I'm listening to this stuff and excited about it is how can I continue that excitement without giving myself so much that I lose that excitement again, and then I'm just like exhausted from the amount of work. It's like just how do I create the limitations so that I maintain my own excitement in the process without making it feel like work. And I think for me right now, one of the big problems I've been trying to solve with the Octatrack is how do you make it feel like you're involved and you're not just teaching the machine how to play the song? How do you make it so that you feel like you're doing something? And there's all kinds of ways. I think like EasyBot, for example, shout out to EasyBot. He talks a lot about in his channel about using the sampling functions and the delays. I can't remember what they're called, but like the sort of the lock delay effects to play sections of the rhythm back, and using the crossfader to perform that is one way of being like sort of connected to the process of the music making. And I think for me, especially with the breakbeats, because that was kind of where it clicked, was like, oh, breakbeats are always being reshuffled and sliced and kind of recombined in these seemingly like intricate ways, but also, the Octatrack can really excel at making those breakbeats generate their own interest without you actually having to pick the ones that sound the best. Something weird going on with the synth right now. I think it was just compression.